What if prehistoric campfires were secretly arranging people by rank? Not kings, servants, and tax collectors, because nobody enjoyed paperwork yet. Instead, fire pits may have organized families, workers, learners, and respected elders. A few burned stones can reveal who sat where thousands of years ago. That sounds impossible, until every flint chip begins behaving like evidence. Archaeologists study these patterns like detectives investigating the world's oldest dinner party. The clues include ash, bones, tools, footprints, and carefully discarded rubbish. Together, they suggest camp life was organized rather than pleasantly chaotic. But did the biggest fire belong to the most important person? Was the warmest seat reserved for leaders, experts, children, or grandmothers? The answer reveals something surprising about hierarchy before cities, money, or written laws. Welcome to prehistoric society, where your seating chart could determine survival. Let us travel roughly 14,000 years into Europe's late Ice Age. Much of the landscape was cold, open, windy, and seriously unfriendly. Small groups followed reindeer, horses, fish, plants, and seasonal opportunities. They carried tools, hides, fuel, food, stories, and probably endless complaints. These communities were hunter-gatherers, but hunting was only one daily responsibility. People processed meat, scraped hides, repaired weapons, gathered plants, and raised children. Everyone needed skills, because prehistoric customer support was famously unavailable. Fire made cold camps livable, food safer, and darkness less terrifying. It also created a social centre where people worked, talked, and watched others. A hearth was therefore more than ancient central heating with smoke problems. It could anchor a household, a workshop, or a temporary gathering place. Some camps contained one main hearth surrounded by concentrated activity zones. Others contained several hearths, each associated with smaller domestic groups. These repeated clusters can resemble neighbourhoods without streets, fences, or annoying homeowners. One famous example comes from Pincevant, near the Seine River in France. Magdalenian groups repeatedly camped there during the final centuries of the Ice Age. Flood sediments sometimes buried occupation surfaces quickly, preserving remarkable horizontal patterns. Excavators exposed broad living floors instead of digging only narrow vertical trenches. This allowed tools and bones to remain mapped near their original positions. Suddenly, archaeologists could examine a camp almost like a frozen social photograph. At Parsevant, several domestic units appeared around their own central hearths. Flint pieces could even be refitted, proving objects moved between specific areas. That movement showed cooperation, teaching, exchange, and shared work across the campsite. Yet here comes the first twist about prehistoric hierarchy. The hearths did not reveal royal palaces surrounded by miserable worker fires. They revealed repeated, family-sized units, each organized around practical responsibilities. Early hierarchy may have been situational, flexible, and based on knowledge. The best hunter was important during tracking, but less impressive while sowing. The skilled napper mattered when sharp blades separated dinner from embarrassing failure. An experienced elder remembered seasons, routes, dangers, and previous mistakes. Children occupied lower positions in skill, but remained essential future specialists. Respect could shift with the task instead of remaining permanently attached. That is very different from later societies with inherited titles and estates. However, flexible hierarchy still influenced space, attention, and access to warmth. Where you sat could reveal what you knew and what others expected. Imagine one ordinary family arriving at camp before the weather worsens. An older woman checks the wind while younger adults unload hides. A skilled craftsperson selects a flat working place beside the main hearth. Children gather nearby, close enough to watch, but safely outside flying sparks. Hunters carry carcass sections toward processing areas beside their household cluster. Nobody draws a floor plan, yet everybody understands the arrangement. This knowledge comes from habit, tradition, and countless previous camps. The fire is placed where heat reaches workers without filling shelters with smoke. Entrances, prevailing winds, available fuel, and ground conditions influence every decision. A badly placed hearth could turn bedtime into an eye-watering disaster. Once burning the hearth becomes the camp's strongest organizing landmark. Heavy work often happens nearby, because light and warmth improve accuracy. Sharp flakes scatter where stone tools are made and repaired. Small bone fragments collect where meat is cut and marrow extracted. Scrapers accumulate where hides are cleaned for clothing, bedding, or shelter. Larger rubbish usually gets tossed farther away from people's feet. Apparently, even prehistoric humans disliked stepping on yesterday's reindeer dinner. Archaeologists call these patterned zones activity areas or spatial units. They do not simply assume every artifact stayed exactly where dropped. People kicked objects, cleaned floors, reused spaces, and disturbed older deposits. Animals burrowed later. Water shifted sediments, and roots pushed objects around. Therefore, each pattern must survive several skeptical tests before interpretation. Refitting broken flint pieces provides one especially powerful test. When matching fragments connect, researchers can reconstruct sequences of movement and production. A core may remain beside one half, while useful blades appear elsewhere. That suggests sharing, exchange, or movement between related camp groups. Now comes another surprise hidden inside the scattered stone chips. Poorly struck flakes can identify beginners practicing beside skilled toolmakers. Expert knappers produce controlled sequences, while apprentices leave wonderfully educational mistakes. Those mistakes form an archaeological classroom with absolutely terrible lighting. At sites like Etiole and Pansfon, different skill levels appear within dwellings. This suggests knowledge passed through observation, imitation, correction, and repeated practice. The hearth created a stage where expertise became visible to everyone. A master could demonstrate technique, while learners copied the gestures nearby. Seating position therefore reflected teaching relationships, not merely comfort. The respected central person might be an instructor rather than a political chief. That distinction matters because expertise creates influence without creating permanent inequality. Someone can lead one activity while following another person later. Modern offices call this teamwork. Then schedule 3 meetings about it. Prehistoric camps probably settled the matter faster. Because winter was approaching, food processing created another layer of organization around the flames. Large carcass sections required coordinated cutting, carrying, roasting, drying, and storage. Tasks were distributed according to experience, strength, timing, and immediate need. Some people butchered, while others maintained fires or prepared hides. Young children likely watched, helped, played, and learned safe boundaries. Older children could perform smaller tasks before attempting dangerous or difficult work. Again, rank followed competence more than fancy clothing or personal wealth. Archaeologists cannot identify every individual from a pile of debris. However, repeated patterns show that people did not work randomly. Certain zones concentrated particular tools, materials, and levels of technical skill. Domestic clusters also suggest smaller social groups inside larger gatherings. Several households might unite for migration hunting or seasonal processing. They could cooperate intensely while maintaining their own hearth-centered spaces. This created nested layers of belonging within one temporary settlement. Your closest circle gathered around one fire, while allies occupied neighbouring fires. The entire camp formed a broader cooperative network around shared goals. Sound familiar to families sharing one enormous holiday meal? Each household contributes something, everyone cooperates, and somebody guards the best food. At Pulsivor, one occupation included multiple units linked with collective reindeer processing. More than 70 reindeer were represented in that carefully studied seasonal camp. Such work required planning beyond one person's strength or appetite. Cooperation could increase food security before the hardest winter conditions. Yet cooperation also created opportunities for reputation, obligation, and influence. A generous household might gain allies by sharing meat or useful blades. A skilled family could become central during major hunting preparations. An elder with reliable knowledge might guide decisions about timing and routes. These are ingredients of hierarchy, but not proof of permanent social classes. Here is the third twist, and it ruins many dramatic reconstructions. The person nearest the fire was not automatically the tribe's supreme ruler. Proximity could reflect cold sensitivity, cooking duties, craft work, age, or smoke avoidance. Even the largest hearth might indicate duration or function, not political power. Archaeologists must separate practical organisation from imagined kingship. Otherwise, every barbecue becomes evidence for an empire. To evaluate status, researchers compare hearth size with artifacts and surrounding space. Do unusual ornaments, rare materials, better food, or privileged sleeping areas cluster nearby? Are some households larger, richer, or repeatedly placed in central positions? Do burial differences support the same pattern of inequality? Without several independent clues, hierarchy remains a cautious hypothesis. This caution is important because prehistoric communities varied enormously across time. No single camp layout represents every hunter-gatherer society that ever existed. Some groups were strongly egalitarian and discouraged boastful behaviour. Others recognized influential leaders, ritual specialists, wealthy households, or inherited privilege. Seasonal abundance could allow larger gatherings and more complicated social roles. Scarcity could favour smaller, mobile groups with flexible leadership. The arrangement of fires, therefore, reflects local choices, not universal commandments. Still, spatial order reveals expectations that people rarely wrote down. Repeated positioning shows how daily behaviour turns social rules into physical patterns. A child learned belonging partly by learning where to sit and work. A visitor learned relationships by watching who shared which half. A skilled outsider might receive a place near specialised activity. Someone violating boundaries could create tension without breaking any written law. The camp's map existed inside people's habits before appearing in the ground. Firelight also changed behaviour after practical work ended. Daylight conversations often focus on tasks, movement, resources, and immediate problems. Ethnographic research among hunter-gatherers shows nighttime fire talk can become more imaginative. Stories, distant people, spirits, adventures, and moral lessons enter the conversation. Such evidence cannot be copied directly onto every prehistoric society. However, it demonstrates how fire can organize attention and shared memory. Everyone faces the light. While darkness creates a natural social boundary, a gifted storyteller may temporarily command more influence than any hunter. The hearth becomes a theatre, classroom, council chamber, and comedy club. Sadly, no prehistoric audience left written reviews for the evening performance. Who sits closest may depend on hearing, age, storytelling roles, or relationships. Children absorb history while pretending they are definitely not becoming sleepy. Stories teach cooperation, acceptable behaviour, kinship, dangers, and group identity. Repeated gatherings can strengthen shared rules without police, courts, or paperwork. This gives the hearth a political role even without formal government. But smoke complicates every comfortable image of cheerful circular seating. Experiments and airflow studies show cave hearth placement affects smoke exposure. Some positions become warmer, clearer, brighter, or considerably more miserable. That means apparent privilege may partly reflect ventilation rather than social rank. Here comes the fourth twist hiding inside the smoke. The best seat might not be closest to the flames. It might sit sideways, where warmth arrives without smoke entering your eyes. A central leader seated dramatically downwind would mostly look powerful and cough. Cave shape, entrance direction, ceiling height, and weather alter smoke movement. People likely learned these effects through repeated experience rather than equations. Hearth placement therefore combines social tradition with environmental engineering. A fire may separate clean living space from dirty processing space. It may also mark shelter entrances or divide sleeping and working areas. Multiple small fires can serve separate households or specialized tasks. One larger communal fire can unite several groups during shared activities. Different arrangements create different opportunities for supervision, privacy, and conversation. Several strange facts make hearth archaeology more complicated than expected. First, a dark stain is not automatically a prehistoric fireplace. Natural burning, decayed plants, and later disturbance can create misleading patches. Researchers examine ash, charcoal, reddened sediment, burned bone, and heat-altered stone. Microscopic analysis can reveal repeated burning episodes and fuel choices. Second, fires were often cleaned, rebuilt, moved, or reused. A tidy hearth may represent careful maintenance rather than brief occupation. Nearby rubbish dumps can preserve what people deliberately removed from living areas. Third, one archaeological layer may combine visits separated by years. This mixture is called a palimpsest, like writing repeatedly on reused material. It can create imaginary activity zones belonging to nobody at one moment. Separating occupations requires stratigraphy, refitting, dating, and patient argument. Fourth, burned bone sometimes served as fuel when wood was limited. Bone and wood produce different heat, light, and smoke characteristics. Fuel choice, therefore, changes how far people could sit comfortably. Fifth, tiny flakes may reveal more social information than impressive tools. Finished tools travelled away, while manufacturing waste remained beside workers. The boring rubbish can identify apprentices, experts, exchanges, and household boundaries. Archaeology frequently rewards the person willing to study prehistoric floor sweepings. Sixth, children were probably everywhere, although older interpretations often ignored them. Small practice pieces and awkward production may preserve their learning activities. However, awkward work could also come from unskilled adults or difficult material. Researchers must compare several clues before assigning any age group. Seventh, hearth-centered order does not prove men and women occupied fixed zones. Gendered spaces exist in many known societies, but prehistoric evidence remains difficult. Assuming modern stereotypes can make ancient camps look suspiciously familiar. The safest interpretation begins with patterns, then considers several possible explanations. That approach produces fewer dramatic chiefs, but much better history. So what hierarchy was hidden inside prehistoric fire arrangements? It was often a hierarchy of tasks, knowledge, age, trust, and responsibility. It could change between hunting, crafting, storytelling, childcare, and seasonal decision-making. Some people influenced others because their skills protected the entire group. Households remained distinct, yet neighbouring fires supported larger cooperative gatherings. The camp combined private belonging with public cooperation in one flexible design. Fire organized warmth, production, food sharing, teaching, memory, and conversation. Its location transformed invisible relationships into patterns that archaeology can sometimes recover. Yet burned stones never provide a complete social constitution. They offer probabilities, comparisons, and clues requiring careful interpretation. The greatest surprise is not that prehistoric people had social order. The surprise is how ordinary routines created that order without formal institutions. Every discarded flake recorded a choice about work, movement, or sharing. Every hearth connected people while also defining boundaries between groups. Hierarchy may have begun less like a throne and more like responsibility. Authority could belong to whoever possessed the knowledge needed that day. That flexible system helped mobile communities survive dangerous and changing environments. It also reminds us that leadership and inequality are not identical. A campsite floor can preserve cooperation more clearly than domination. So, what other forgotten social rules are still hiding beneath ancient ashes?